And that's very relevant as we talk about, the sustainable aviation fuel and why the fuel that we're talking about, the SAF, we'll call it a SAF from going on, but why we need it to be similar to the current jet fuel of today, similar in terms of how it operates on an aircraft. We want it to be safe.
I'm Stewart Muir, host of Power Struggle. I'm really excited at our guest today, helping us to solve the energy trilemma. How do we get the energy in our lives that we need that's reliable and available and acceptable? And that guest is Geoffrey Tauvette. He's the head of the Canadian Council for Sustainable Aviation Fuel. And we're going to talk about how we get more sustainable in future, how we get to where we need to go in the most sustainable way. Geoff, good to have you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, Geoff, where did you start your day?
I operate out of Calgary. Been there for about 20 years. So I flew in. I had other meetings today, so I made sure, I flew in for a purpose and did some other stuff at the same time. So, but yeah, from Calgary.
Well, I was in Calgary this week. I did a day trip, went in the morning, came back that evening, all very efficient, stacked up a few meetings as well. That's how I try to do it. But I suspect we're both frequent flyers. I know I am, and you must be, but sustainable aviation fuel is kind of a passion of yours, and I think it's a fascinating topic because we're seeing just a huge public expectation. We all want to fly more, whether it's going to Calgary for the day or Vancouver for the day, in your case today, and maybe people are going to Thailand or Arizona, and they're planning that holiday right now. Or like me, maybe my son is studying in Europe and is going to go to Morocco for the weekend, not by train like I used to do when I was a student.
Yeah. I fly by ship once.
By ship. There you go. We're OG Euro students here, but this expectation everyone has, and then you open your fridge and it's December. You've got some nice fat grapes there. Did they walk here or did they fly here from Chile?
Yeah.
This world we're in today, what do you make of it? You're an aviation and energy expert. You're at the intersection of really what everyone is thinking and doing.
That's right, yeah. And I've been doing it for a while. So I've always, I've been in commercial aviation space for over 25 years. Always in the fuel environment world and really brought together at my last job at airline, I'm no longer there, but brought sustainability and fuel, the fuel world and environment together. So I've been kind of at the beginnings of all the discussions around the climate action plans at an international level that aviation has had in place for a long time, as well as the domestic one. So, and in there, of course, buying the fuel, looking at the supply chains, how do we create this new renewable fuel to be used on aircraft? And that's really the challenge that I've been passionate about for a very long time. It's just like putting those together, talking to the people to bring together. Key here is we need to work together. Airlines can't do this alone. Like the fuel that needs to be created, the new value chain, as we call it, is just very, very much bigger than what it used to be. And that's where I find myself playing a lot in, right? Is just really trying to talk to all those various stakeholders, bring them together, getting rid of I like to call it the myth busting of like different people's assumptions of what's going on the other side. So I find that interesting. And look, I've been in the industry for a long time. I want to give back to it. But part of, I think what I'm doing is really trying to change the industry. So that's my main goal, is like, I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah, well, this is exciting stuff. And, it feels like there's a problem to be solved. I mean, the problem is we want to be able to travel. We want to be able to travel in a way that is sustainable. How do we, do both those things? And, here at Power Struggle with the podcast, the project we're doing, the way I like to put it is we're trying to solve the energy trilemma. We want to have affordable energy. We want it to be reliable, so it's there when we need it, whether that's flipping the switch and the light comes on, or you're going to the airport and that plane can take off because it's got fuel. And then we want it to be acceptable to the public, right? And that might mean sustainable, it might mean other things. You want to get these three things together, but it turns out it's, as we're discovering in this journey, the Power Struggle, it's not easy to do that. I think the problem you're solving is a very aligned nature. And I don't know how you would put it in energy trilemma terms, but where would you say we are in that regard?
Yeah, and funny enough, I belong to a group called the Energy Futures Lab of Alberta, and we're focused with the same idea. How do we transition to an energy system that we can live with, and that it's fair and people can access it, and so on and so forth. And it's that transition part, that system thinking with respect to the energy puts and calls that have to happen to make this work. And for aviation, they haven't explained it very well in what they've actually done to improve their emissions. And there's a lot of work and a lot of...
You mean the aviation, like the airplane companies, or
just the industry in general. So
airlines?
Yeah, the airlines, okay. We call them the OEMs, so like the plane makers and the Boeings, the manufacturers, things like that.
Refineries and
the refiners, yeah, like just call it the entire group.
Right. All right.
And so like our primary climate issue, of course, is the airlines or the aircraft burn jet fuel, right? Which is so just for reference, because we're gonna probably talk about it a bit, right?
Sure.
It's a fuel that sits like a little bit under diesel fuel. So it's between diesel and gasoline, if you will. So it's a cut of the barrel, probably about 10% of the barrel that in normal refining that's made into jet fuel. But it's a product, we like to say it's a product that needs to be treated with white gloves, right? Aircraft, we want to be very safe. Aviation industry wants to be very safe. So this fuel needs to be safe to use on an aircraft at altitude. So lots of time, lots of money spent ensuring that this fuel specification, the handling is all safe. And that's very relevant as we talk about, the sustainable aviation fuel and why the fuel that we're talking about, the SAF, we'll call it a SAF from going on, but why we need it to be similar to the current jet fuel of today, similar in terms of how it operates on an aircraft. We want it to be safe. So lots of testing that gets done in terms of how we make it and ensuring that it can be used on the aircraft. And then, of course, how we handle or whatever. So the current SAF that we're talking about ends up being the biggest solution for the industry in terms of reducing its emissions. So the emissions are what's impacting, the environment and the climate. You're burning fuel at pretty big volumes. You're burning fuel on the ground. You're burning fuel in the atmosphere, right? So there are different impacts that happen there. We can spend, so the industry has spent a lot of time ensuring that we bring in new aircraft, right? All the new aircraft that you see, the Boeing 787s, the Airbus 321 long range or the Neos that you're seeing, they all use less fuel, right? So fuel it's an expensive commodity. The airlines don't want to waste it, right? So they spend an inordinate amount of times or effort to really ensure that they use the least amount of fuel fossil.
So what are some of the ways they can do that?
So I'll give you one example. So I've worked for the airline. So at my last airline, we brought an aircraft into the hangar and we stripped it of all the stuff that wasn't regulatory, weighed it, and figured out what we didn't need anymore. Right. So that's the extreme that airlines go to. Try to figure out
every pound counts.
Every pound counts. Yeah. So that's one way of doing it. So reducing weight, but really effective ways on the technology side is really the new aircraft. And you see generally, a generation of aircraft, they're probably between 10 and 15% more efficient than the previous generation that they're replacing, usually through the engines. But you're seeing carbon fiber exteriors and lighter materials and things of that nature. But the primary way that a lot of airlines have reduced their fuel consumption, and you see in the Canadian Airlines, for example, a lot of new planes in the fleet, right? But you make that decision for 20, 25 years. So hard to swap out when a new aircraft comes in saying it's like you changing your car, right, every 6 months almost, right, or every year, or however that looks like. So that's one way they do it. Then there's all the stuff around that. So can you fly efficiently? So the air transportation system. So in the old days, in some of the old systems, you fly between points. So your routing is between points everywhere, and it's a longer route. If you have a more efficient air traffic control system in Canada, has actually done some pretty good investments. There's more direct flying, which of course reduces emissions, right? And then of course anything you do on the ground. So how's an airport designed? How far do you taxi? How can you turn one engine off when you taxi into a gate? All these things kind of add up. And then that's what the industry does in terms of making sure that we use fuel in the most efficient way. But if we want to go further, there's not too many other options we have, right? Like the new fuels, like electric aircraft, is being worked on. But of course, they're not made yet to fly long distances. So I think we have Harbour Air here, who is trialed an electric aircraft. It's pretty cool, right?
That's fun stuff.
I don't know if you've heard them talk, right? They have some interesting challenges. I think they have a plane that they've converted over, but now you need to get it approved to fly with passengers in it. And that's challenging because the regulator doesn't necessarily, it's all new for them as well, right? So how do you get that regulated to be able to be used in commercial flight? So that has to go through a certain period too, but we'll see them. They'll come probably by the end of the decade, shorter distances, but we're still challenged with flying far. So what do we do? And that's where sustainable aviation fuels come in. Sustainable, like SAF, it's a jet fuel replacement, except it's made from renewable materials, and it produces or on a life cycle basis. And this is what's important: on a life cycle basis, has way less emissions compared to a normal barrel of jet fuel, for example.
So we're going to be able to get sustainable aviation fuel in our planes, and we can all fly around not worried about the emissions anymore.
That is the plan. We think when industry forecasts impact of SAF in terms of what we need in order to achieve our long-term climate goals, it probably replaces about 60 to 70% of the current jet fuel market, if you will, is done through a sustainable aviation fuel. The problem today is, and I think this is what we're talking about today, is like how do we switch? How do we build that market? It's still expensive. It's expensive to fly. Jet fuel usually represents about 25% of an airline's fuel cost. So how do we work in a fuel that today is still anywhere from like 3 to 8 times more expensive than current fuel?
Yeah, that's funny. I'm getting eerie parallels here to another area of public policy, electric vehicles and AVs, because we're talking in a time when just a few days ago, the Prime Minister of Canada said, we've got these EV mandates. We were going to make everyone buy an EV by a certain date, or a large share of EVs. But we've decided that since Canadians are not actually doing that of their own volition because they seem not confident they can charge the cars or afford them, or other issues that consumers have, they're just not doing what the policy said they're supposed to do. So we're going to have a policy that recognizes that a little bit. Now, we're sitting here in BC where we have that same problem, but the policymakers have said, well, that's okay, we're going to have a policy that no one wants to follow, but we're still going to have the policy and not change it because the public is so wrong, or the consumer is so wrong. I think it's what the message is from that.
Or the consumer's not going to do it on their own.
The consumer will do it, yeah. I mean, it's almost when they put subsidies, consumer subsidies, you get $5,000 back or whatever when you buy one, then more people buy. So it pushes that percentage of buyers who are incentivized that way just over the line, the subsidy off, because maybe the government's out of money for that kind of thing. And then suddenly people aren't doing it. It doesn't stay there by itself once you get it to this high level. And this is the conundrum of anyone who's, so when it comes to the energy trilemma and EVs, I'm just wondering, I do have a question here for you, Jeff, because I'm just intrigued whether these are kind of parallel similarities. Am I seeing a relationship that doesn't exist? I mean, what's happening with consumer adoption of SAF? Which I guess consumers are the airlines. Are they doing what they are meant to be doing?
It's an interesting question. So I would start by saying airline is not a car.
Right.
And I think the problems of the industry are very, very different from how these climate policies affect, like, say, just you, whether you're going to buy gas or buy an electric car or buy renewable or whatever it looks like, right? Like it's a completely different, I'm not going to say industry, but a completely different problem that we're trying to solve. We're solving problems.
All right. So what's the difference?
Well, cars, are you competing against anyone? Who are you competing against, for example? So when you have to buy an electric car, are you worried that someone from a big city down in the US is going to come take your job away? Or, is going to steal some business away from you. Probably not, right? But for aviation, you're in this different competitive regime. You're flying into airports. You're competing against airports are competing against other major airports. So the cost of flying into that airport becomes important, especially you're trying to compete against like another. So in BC, for example, like what is Vancouver Airport's cost structure versus Seattle? What are the decisions can be made? You can use your electric car and drive down to Seattle, and if you happen to save, I don't know, a couple $100 for a family of 4 on your airfare, you might actually do it, right? And so we feel that it's unfair to try to take policies directed at especially car drivers, for example, and apply to aviation. So we think that's problematic. So that I would say is number one. And then I always like to say, is it the airlines that don't want to buy the fuel, or is it the consumers that don't want to pay for it? And so who's the real person that doesn't want it? So do you want to put something in place that forces the airlines to buy the more expensive fuel and then pass it down to the consumer? Maybe that's a good idea if you don't have a cheaper airport that's 100 kilometers away that can outbid you at every opportunity, right? Because they don't have the same policy in place. It's cheaper to operate. So those are the small little issues that I think airlines are dealing with today. Is how do you? Yes, they want to decarbonize. They've all said they want to, right? Invest in internationally. The industry's agreed. Yes, we have a target. We are decarbonizing. They were one of the first industries worldwide to develop like a global target for the industry. So they've been working on this a long time. But now we're challenged with, okay, how do we get this policy right so we don't, make ourselves so uncompetitive that other areas can steal the business from us? And unfortunately, it's just so different from a car that we just got to watch it on how we sort of compare those two policies.
Yeah. Now, at YVR, Vancouver International Airport, there's a lot of airlines from around the world. I mean, we've got our flag carrier here in Canada. We've got various airlines. You've got Porter,
yep,
as well as Air Canada. You've got WestJet. But then you've got British Airways. I know they fly here. You see Air New Zealand.
Cathay. So the Chinese carriers, Air New Zealand is here as well.
Air India.
Air India
comes here.
Yep.
Now there's a direct flight to Dubai as well, but that's Air Canada.
Air Canada's flying one, yeah.
Yeah. So you got these airlines from just all over the world that come here. What decisions are these airlines making? Because you're flagging this issue of, would someone who could make a choice, they're based in Vancouver, maybe they could fly out of Seattle or Bellingham, maybe. But you've got people coming in as well. They're saying that those airlines are saying, we're flying to Vancouver. When we get there, we're going to have to fill up with fuel, and we buy it in the local system. Maybe we could get it cheaper if we flew to this other city. Is that a risk? Is that a realistic thing?
So that's the crazy business of aviation, right? So you have a hub airport, people are connecting out of it. So you're trying to compete. So there are a few decisions you can make. If it's too expensive, you can pass it through. If there's no competition on a route, maybe you're able to pass it through. So it's not a problem. You could reduce your flying, or you could change equipment size. So maybe you don't bring a big aircraft in, you bring a smaller one in, or you come in less often, right? If you're really trying to protect that, or you stop offering service to a regional network, right? So you're saying I have to save costs somewhere, so maybe I'll stop doing that in exchange for protecting my international route. You can stop flying altogether, which, I don't think that's what we want either. The consumer side is interesting because you have such a wide breadth of folks that fly. You have friends and relatives, right? Like for, people who live here, their families are from afar. Did they save up? They want to go visit from time to time. So it's an event, right? You have the flyers for business, like you and I, who, are less cost sensitive and probably can, accept a little bit more of an increase from time to time to be able to potentially pay for this. But you also have a large percentage of people who, if they are very sensitive to the cost, who might just be looking for the best deal. And unfortunately today, because you can do it, you can just drive somewhere else and go take a cheaper flight. So, you add up all that together, what does that mean? What does that mean for service out of Vancouver? There's a lot of what ifs in here, right? Like a lot of things could happen. But the reality is, if policies are pushing the cost of that product up only in your area and everywhere else around you is not affected by it, eventually something's going to happen. Something's going to happen.
Now, BC is a really interesting place to be a watcher of energy and the energy trilemma, because in BC, there's this kind of political philosophy that's been adopted. It's quite a resilient one of climate leadership. And the thinking goes something like this, if even though we're a pretty small jurisdiction, 5 million people, but if we show that we are adopting a policy, a green policy, even though it's maybe more expensive than, say, our neighbors in Washington State or Alberta, and it makes costs higher for consumers here, that's okay. We're going to do that, because if we do that, the rest of the world is going to look at us and say, wow, look at BC, that's leadership, we're going to do that. And so for the last decade or so, that's been kind of this philosophy. And, I've been watching to see, okay, what's going to happen? Is this climate leadership thing going to play out? I bet the rest of the world is going to go, yeah, let's do the BC thing. But when you look at what's actually happening, in the USA, they're kind of scrapping any environmental policy under Trump. So they're not taking the cue from BC. You look at what's going on, say, in the growth economies of the world, the biggest growth ones, like in East Asia and South Asia, they don't seem to be taking a cue from BC's climate leadership, because they're just using more energy. In fact, they want to buy energy from Canada. When it comes to sustainable aviation fuel, I've been reading up. I knew you were coming. I've been following sustainable aviation fuel. I don't see a lot of other places outside maybe Western Europe where they're doing this kind of mandatory thing of pushing their local aviation industries to the extremes that we're seeing in BC. So this climate leadership ethos has been translated for aviation into these rules, and it's a classic problem of mandating that consumers or industry uses something that doesn't actually exist in the marketplace. And I'm just intrigued by this. I mean, is there enough sustainable aviation fuel to do the climate leadership thing?
Yeah, so the world has been slowly building more SAF capacity. Slowly.
Is that right? Okay.
Slowly. I mean, I think, I can't recall the stats offhand, but the International Air Transportation Association group tracks it. Maybe it's like less than 1% or 2% today of total jet fuel use is sustained via SAF.
Sorry, 2%?
Yeah. So it's not very much, but we knew that, right? Like so Canadian Council for Sustainable Aviation Fuels, our organization, we've taken an ecosystem approach to advancing the production and use of SAF in Canada. So we launched a roadmap a few years back and suggested that Canada has all the right ingredients, by the way, to make SAF, right? We have the feedstock, which is generally a problem in a lot of countries, but we have sustainable feedstock and we have a lot of it. We have, I like to say, a refining capacity. We refine hard to refine stuff, and this is what this is. So we have that. We have airlines that will use it. If we make it cheap enough or affordable enough, all the international airlines that fly into Canada will be able to pick it up as well. So it's great, right? We're playing a role in helping decarbonize the industry. So that's kind of cool. So we have all that, but what's missing, of course, is like, okay, well, how do we get that rolling? And when we look at our North Star, if you will, on what we're looking at. So any type of policy, we want it to be, we want aviation emission reductions, essentially, right? So if a policy gets put in place, then we want, at least if if the industry is paying into it, let's make sure at least we are reducing our emissions from the industry at the same time. But we want to activate Canadian feedstock. We want to make it in Canada. We think there's opportunities to do so here. But at the same time, we want to keep the sector, the aerospace and the aviation sectors, competitive, right? So if you put those four North Star kind of sort of directional things on what we're talking about, that I think it's very important to analyze it like that. So today, there's been very few amounts or very little volume of SAF produced in Canada. There's been a few trials here and there. There's one in Parkland. Parkland announced last year here in Burnaby that they produced a bit of a SAF through a process called co-processing. So really using the existing refinery and replacing the crude with some form of bio-crude or some, renewable feedstock that they could use existing refining capacity to make. But there are other, it was just an expensive affair. Like the setup was expensive. There's not necessarily the support on the spec side. They were helped out through the provincial sort of systems here with, if we're getting into text, like the initiative agreement. So there is some support from the province, I think, in terms of sort of pushing these things forward. So I think there are some good things that are being considered as part of all of this. It's just the worry still is there's not enough, right?
So I'm just curious. I mean, suppose that was some sustainable aviation fuel.
Yeah.
Would I be able to hold up some conventional aviation fuel and see that they're different? Are they like, what's the
chemically the same?
Same.
Almost the same. We still need to blend for a few of the properties, but yeah, you would be able to tell the difference.
I'm glad that's water.
Well, no, isn't the story like Virgin and Airways? I think Richard Branson was on a flight and the very first SAF flight, and they told him, "Oh yeah, this is safe," and he took a
safe to drink, not safe to drink, boss.
Not to safe to drink. So, anyways, I wouldn't suggest you drink it, but it does have actually some good properties that are better than jet fuel in that it doesn't have particulate matter, for example. It doesn't create sulfur. So, I mean, those are the precursors for, smog and things of that nature, right? So I mean, there are some better qualities to it on that side. Of course, it doesn't produce the same amount of emissions. So, but it's unfortunately really expensive.
Does it have the same amount of energy as conventional?
Yeah, interesting enough, yes, it does generally, and actually a little bit more sometimes. So it actually could help, right? Like you would use less to travel the same amount essentially. So, but I mean, you would have to really, direct that product to that aircraft, which is really hard to do.
So I sort of imagine if you're an airline or you're in charge of the fuel depot at the airport, hey, Chevron, I need some fuel. Can you bring it? Yeah, when do you need it? Next Wednesday. So the truck comes next Wednesday and then you got your fuel. How does it work with sustainable aviation fuel? Do you just call up the supplier and they bring it to you and all that?
Because the market is so new, there's like a whole bunch of deals everywhere. So it depends on where the SAF is coming from, who has it. Because there's not a lot of supply, obviously it tends to get locked up pretty quickly. But yeah, you could, so it's a drop-in fuel. So you still need to blend it though. So that's a technical challenge that it needs to be blended with regular jet fuel to ensure that it meets all the requirements for putting on an aircraft.
So blend it. Okay.
So you blend it. So there's some blending requirements. But you can buy it pre-blended, if you will. So someone takes both, blends it. Usually that's one of the fuel suppliers today does that and then just delivers it to the airport and it's drop-in at that point. It meets all specifications for safety and usage. And in fact, lots of airports are flying on SAF today, right? LA, for example, right, has been receiving SAF deliveries, blended SAF deliveries for many years now. So like and I know each airline, the complexity is each airline says, I am buying SAF, but then it gets put into the airport system and all mixed together. So basically everyone is flying on.
It's kind of a notional thing in some sense. And you mentioned biodiesel and like where does that SAF come from?
Oh, yeah. So that's important. So there's the differentiation. So biodiesel and renewable diesel, of course, are two different products.
Right.
We don't want biodiesel. Biodiesel freezes. It's we don't.
It's not safe.
It's not. Yeah, we don't want that stuff anywhere near jet fuel or aircraft. Yeah. Renewable diesel, on the other hand, of course, is just on the pathway to SAF, if you will. So that's our main challenge today is the same technology pathways that make renewable diesel typically are making SAF as well. So SAF is a little bit more expensive to make and needs a little bit more extra distillation equipment, for example. So it's harder to make, it's more expensive to make. And that's the challenge we have today is that because of that additional expense to make it, that isn't reflected in today's current policies that are supporting the renewable diesel and the ground transportation, transition to those fuels. So we have to find some reason trying to pull it out of that renewable diesel pool.
Okay.
But that means we have to pay even more.
Right.
So then, that's certainly a challenge. So there, like if we go back and look at the four main ways of making SAF, if we want to do that, the main way you hear today is through the use of a plant-based oil. So we use cooking oils like fry oil, like the stuff that restaurants fry their stuff in.
Do we eat enough French fries for that?
Well, that's debatable, I suppose. But there's used cooking oil that gets made. The you hear in the market today, is it really used or not? And that's a whole other challenge, right? But typically, a used cooking oil can be used to make fuel, and in there you have, we'll call it fats, oils, and greases. So tallows, which come from, slaughtering of animals and of that nature, all that fat that gets left behind. And then, of course, you have for Canada, for example, is canola, or any type of other similar oil, soy, or that.
So you're farming for that, and
you're farming for
oil
that.
is. Yeah.
So a question we get asked a lot is, is there enough for everyone? And again, I go back to the system problem. Like, aviation is not depending on growing plants, to get that oil to make all our SAF, right? Like there are other ways, and we'll talk about those in a sec, but there are other ways of getting there. But certainly today, that's called HEFA. So HEFA-based fuels can make renewable diesel and SAF, and the stuff you see in the market today is generally from that process. So around the world, there are various different ways of doing that. You see China building several refineries now. The US, they had a few in the pipeline to use that as well. The new Esso refinery in Edmonton, for example, that just came online is using that process to make renewable diesel. Not SAF, but renewable diesel at right point. Tidewater in BC as well is making renewable diesel through a similar process. That would be that's where we see the SAF coming from in the next little bit. The next stage is using advanced feedstocks like forestry, like wood pellets or forest residuals, agricultural residuals, the stuff left over after you take the grains out. And you can convert those either through gasification, so we like to call it blowing it up,
right? And
then using the magic of chemistry to mix it and turn it into a fuel.
Do we have all the technology we need for that?
All that stuff. So we know how to do it. We know how to do it. Some of the technology needs more help than others, and that's where we're at today, right?
So there must be entrepreneurs, investors, kind of racing into that space to.
Well, yeah, racing is a loaded word, I suppose. So what's missing is what does Canada want to do all this stuff, right? So our thesis is we have all that feedstock. We have it, advanced feedstock. We probably have a lot of it.
Yeah, giant forest industry right here in BC. So
yeah, we know that all that fuel causes problems if left too long. So maybe there's a way we can go get it. So what do we need in place to incent that manufacturing to go get it, turn it into something, and then use it? So if this was all the same price as normal fuel, it wouldn't be a problem, right? Like we would probably be doing it, but it's all expensive. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen to make that work, right? If we have to go build new supply chains and build things in locations we're not used to, and you need water treatment, you need hydrogen, you need electrical power. We know that's a challenge these days, in these places where all these things are. Those are the things that are making it more expensive and challenging for us to build. But we know how to do it. We know how to do it. We just need to make a decision on why we want to do it.
Yeah. Now, you were saying that SAF is about 3 to 8 times more expensive.
Exactly. Yeah.
So right now, the rules call for what percentage to be used of SAF in a
decision there's an emission reduction target in place. There's a net zero target in place as well by 2050. So only in those locations which are mandated is there like an actual required blending requirement. So Europe, I think started at 2%. They're targeting something like 10% by 2030. We know that BC, for example, has set a blend limit starting in 2028 of 1%, going up to 3% in 2030. But the rest of the system is pretty much on a voluntary, call it opt-in basis. So no requirements yet to blend in the US or Canada nationally, for example.
Now, I like to call the contrast there the carrot versus stick, because here in BC, we've kind of gone with the stick approach. You know, we're going to beat you with a stick here if you don't do what we say. Whereas the U.S. is pretty famous for being a carrot country. You know, we want you to find a way to make money from this opportunity. And are they doing that down there, down south?
Yeah, so the U.S., there's been a few changes of late, as you, I think, hinted to before. But there still is let's call it an incentive program that supports the manufacturing of biofuels. They just, I think it's changing as of next year, but there was a small benefit to making SAF the way they had set it up, and unfortunately they're getting rid of that. So we'll see what that does.
Is that the Trump, the federal regulations?
Yeah, they just released the beautiful bill.
Right. So that was one of the things.
Some changes. Yeah. So
we'll find out what that does.
We'll find out. Yeah. But it's still there's still more. There's still an incentive for producing and making it in the U.S. Right. So they're focused on using their feedstock and turning it into something and selling it. Whereas in Canada, I think we still haven't figured that out. You saw last week, you know, we saw a little bit of support for using canola. If you're using canola to make a biofuel, well, here's an incentive for you short term. But we're still missing. How are we going to I think we have the feedstock. It would be way easier to focus on what's the support available to start making it. Like if we make it and we see a pathway to making it, then we can talk about how we're going to use it. But like doing it in reverse when we have all this stuff, and there's small programs that help, but I think we're still small in the world, right? Like we almost need to work together a little better.
Do we make all of our jet fuel now in Canada that we use?
Yeah. So no, we probably make about 70% of our requirements domestically.
Majority of it.
A majority of it. And then 30% of it is imported. So let's call it, there's imports coming in from the east. That generally comes from maybe the south of the US, and all the West Coast, including, you know, Vancouver. Vancouver's market, in fact, for jet fuel is 70% imports,
right,
and 30% domestic. So that's, you know, stuff from the US, stuff from primarily Asia is where most of the jet fuel comes
in. So all the Asia is by ship. Is it shipped in from the US too, or is it pipeline?
It is, well, currently trucked from.
Right, okay. So 70% comes in. If you're flying out of Yveria, that's something to think about.
Yeah, and but when you look forward, so when you look at like the Canadian Energy Regulator, even if you put, you know, new aircraft in place and more fuel efficient aircraft, there's still a growth in jet fuel. So if we're going to grow from where we are today, like we probably produce we use 9 to 10 billion liters of jet fuel a year. We're still pretty small, but if you take the 10 billion, is forecast to go up by another 3-4 billion. And so where's that going to come from? So likely imports. And so we think SAF could play a role in terms of making us a little bit more energy secure by making it here. And when you look out to the future, and this is the challenge with especially the other modes of transportation. So car, you have options, right? You can, if the gas gets too expensive, what would you do? Go take the bus. Right. You might buy an electric car. I have one. I like it, but you know, you might buy an electric car. Trucking, same thing. They have options. You know, they could go electric, they could go hydrogen, but aviation really has zero options for a long time. Right? And then, so we see that volume being needed more in the future versus some of the other fuels. So like that's where we're challenged with. Well, we know this is going to grow in the future. We like all the policies push all the fuels to ground transportation today. We understand that's a bigger sort of pie of emission reductions, but we don't want to be caught in a situation where we're always fighting for like 10 years, and then when we really need, it's going to take us another 10 years to build the market. So how do we get a piece of that market without costing it so much that you kill aviation to start with? Because I don't think that's the goal, and I don't think that helps Canada, being that we really don't have any other method of connecting.
Yeah, and I mean, it's got to be said, we're this giant country, huge landmass. We have a huge amount of essential economic activity where people have to fly pretty long distances. It could be they fly from Newfoundland to northern Alberta to go to work, and people literally do that, but they go from Vancouver to Smithers or Terrace to go to work too. Yeah. And shipping goods, I mean, it's a long, long way, and it's the most efficient, cheapest way. So people are going to need to fly.
Yeah, and like, I mean, you talked to, I remember being on a panel with the president from Air North, I think it was, and he was just saying, the the impact that aviation has on whether it's Yukon or Whitehorse, I can't remember right now, in terms of the ability to allow even the young folk, right? Like they go to school, come back, they can work there, they can but if they need a doctor, they can fly and go see the doctor. So that's where, we need to be careful when we look at how we're going to do this. And the industry wants to, right? And we appreciate, some of the small steps that have been taken. And I think we need to remember that there's an aviation policy and a clean energy policy. And unfortunately, we've only talked about the clean energy without considering how it impacts aviation. And I think it gets forgotten in discussion. That's what we spend a lot of time doing, trying to make aware, hey, we need to think about the impact of this. But at the same time, I mean, the sad reality is, if it costs too much, people stop flying.
Right.
If it costs too much, some people will always fly. Some people will always fly, right? Because there's a group there. But if generally that when you look at the amount of folks that are traveling, it's generally you save for a few years to go on vacation. You're going to visit your friends and relatives. There's a business flying, but
yeah.
So how do you reconcile all that? We don't see the world slowing down in terms of decarbonizing. So as much as maybe our friends to the south have, taken a step or a pause, I'm not sure at the end of the day, it's, for aviation flies all over the place. You're still going to other areas where they're still looking at decarbonizing. And then, should Canada not have a source of SAF, for example, if we need, like if you're flying to Europe and they're not stopping, like how do we ensure that, Canadian Airlines have access to something we need to be able to build our own supply, and we happen to have everything we need to make it compared to a lot of other places that don't.
Yeah.
So like, why aren't we leaders in this?
So let's just summarize this stack of things that needs to happen. So
We're solutioning.
solutioning, yes. I mean, we've got abundant resources of the feedstock to make our own, but it sounds like we lack maybe some of the equipment or the investments in certain refineries or techniques to turn that feedstock into the fuel. So what's the fix in that space to make this work?
I think there are opportunities for us, right? I hope you agree that we can't stay on oil and gas forever. It's going to be a big part of what we do, for sure. But what are the steps that we are taking to make sure that we're competitive in the future? And I think for aviation, one of them should be where we really need to decarbonize. At one point or another, it will become important. I think people will understand it more. And so if we have everything it takes to make, we know that the industry itself in aerospace, and you can look at the latest economic studies that IATA and some of the other international groups have done, and aviation and aerospace represent $115 billion worth of economic output in Canada. Now that's direct and indirect, so that includes tourism and all sort of the supply chains that exist making aircraft in this country. It's like 810,000 jobs, direct and indirect. So if we want to sustain that going into the future, what kind of policies do we need in order to be able to protect that from going forward, right? So we've done some studies. We think we can create a SAF market, which will help us stay competitive in the future, keep that economic output going, right? And when you talk to the OEMs and all those, that sort of industry, like, yeah, we need SAF to be able to continue selling our aircraft. We need SAF. But if it's too expensive, you kill all that activity, you impact that economic output, so it doesn't work. So unfortunately, we need support from the government in order to build this. So we need those signals that make it good for someone to want to make the investment, first of all. But we need some help in terms of spreading out the costs so it's not all on the consumer at the end of the day, right? Because of the impact that the aviation brings. Look what it's done to open up markets. Like, is Calgary without WestJet there? Is it, like you saw the announcements they made in the last 2 months? Is Winnipeg, like, so we just need to look at how we can support making SAF, understanding that aviation aerospace bring a broad impact to the city, the economy, the airport, everyone who lives there. Like, how does that work? And that is the business case for I think asking the government to help us support through some form of incentive type mechanism to help create the environment to make those investments to put the manufacturing in place. And we can use our Canadian feedstock, add value here. Like why are we we export canola seed somewhere else? Like if you crushed and made the oil here and turned it into something of value, well, that, that's a benefit of Canada too. And that all gets worked into that additional economic value that gets produced if we make a SAF market. If we just want to import, we actually lose money.
Right.
That's what we found in our assessments.
So we need to make a little bit of a shift in where we're headed right now in order for this vision to happen.
Yeah.
And if we don't, flyers are going to look at paying more for some or all of their trips.
But yeah,
right?
Yeah.
If they're flying out of BC.
Exactly. Like if it's just imposed, then costs will go up. Is that good? We're already a very high cost air regime in Canada to start with. So it's just yet another additional cost on top of it. Do other countries start going, well, if you're not going to fly in with your own SAF, you're going to land at night as opposed to, the prime landing spots where, or you get charged more because of it. So there are all these things that could happen in the future if we don't do it. But is there a competitive advantage for us to do this? We think yes. It needs some support from the government in order to create that system to focus on manufacturing. That's where the jobs are. That's where, we can export those services to the world as well. You can become experts in transforming our feedstocks into other stuff. We're close to our feedstock. We don't have a long distance to go to sort of process it. There's all sorts of great reasons for why we should do this. It's just you need the willingness to kind of sort of all work together to make it happen.
Well, how do people learn more?
How do they learn more? So that's a great question. So we have our website, of course, c-saf.ca. We're just about to produce some awareness information around SAF. So how's it made? What are the issues? What are the environmental impacts? So we're just in the process of finishing those touches up, and we'll be releasing that soon. But I think it's important that the flyers start getting more aware of the sustainability impact of their travel, and until we understand a little bit more of what that looks like, we were going to have a hard time with this. But I think it's getting there. I mean, wouldn't you want to travel sustainably going down south?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's a great opportunity. And so imagine if we said to you, hey, this fuel you're on was farmed in Saskatchewan. We converted it into SAF in BC, and we brought it to the airport, and you're flying down to the Caribbean on 80%.
Who doesn't want that?
I know it's exciting. And how come we can't be a low carbon aviation hub, right? So now Calgary or BC has a low carbon fuel where international airlines want to come, and it's affordable. But the key is got to be affordable, right? Yeah. So how do we get there? We get there through sale, and we get there through having support to build the supply chains and manufacturing to make it happen. And I think that's what we need to really get to where we need to get to.
Absolutely fascinating. I'd like to take a moment to thank our special guest, Geoff Tauvette, for coming on the Power Struggle program today. Conversations like these make all the difference in a world of misinformation and uncertain reporting. So make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because we're going to be tackling new topics with exciting guests like Geoff every week on Power Struggle.